This season of the Breech Birth podcast will be a little different. I'll be speaking with researchers, midwives, and obstetricians working within the breech birth space, bringing additional perspectives, knowledge, and evidence-based research to you, the listener. I hope you enjoy these conversations. Hi, Brooke. Welcome to the podcast.
How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us. So before we jump into our questions, could you just share a bit of a snapshot about who you are, what you've been doing in the birth realm?
Sure. So I have been working in the birth realm for 20 years, come this October, and I have worked in it in pretty much all the different capacities, including home birth mother myself. So I've gotten to kind of see all the spectrums and varieties of professions in the birth realm, which is, I think, giving me a really nice broad perspective. I work all over the southeast of the U.S.
Amazing. So first question to start us off is, how many breech births have you attended?
Last time I counted, I think I was at 34, so somewhere in that range.
Yeah. And have you encountered any barriers or limitations in your practice when you're supporting women in relation to breech birth? And if so, what were these?
Yes, we do see a lot of practice limitations. Most of the states in the U.S. have at least some type of barrier to breech birth. For some, it is, they won't do primate breech births. For some, they'll only do frank breech births. If it's a second twin, they'll only do it with breech extraction. To my knowledge, none of the system options are just straightforward. Yep. If you have a breech baby, we will support you in the southeast of the U.S., kind of where I am.
Could you explain the potential legal issues a midwife might experience if they chose to support a woman with a breech baby in a state that has an illegalized breech?
We could certainly, make the case that at the very minimum, they will be brought up for violation of the regulatory restrictions that the state has placed. But depending on what doctor, hospital staff, legal person that you might make mad, they can also try and add additional charges, child endangerment and falsifying, documents and falsifying your credentials and stacking whatever else they can on you. And it's very difficult for midwives in the U.S. who are supporting breech birth when the system itself doesn't support it. Unfortunately, the mentality here is that the medical system is the gold standard. So if the medical system doesn't support it, then clearly it should not be supported. There's quite a few restrictions on nurse midwives in the area, and it's even more difficult to make a case if you have one group of midwives who is supporting something when another group of midwives is specifically not allowed to do that. We see it, we're talking about breech, but we also see it with twins and VBACs as well. So, as we've seen across the country and even across the world, if the system doesn't support something, then you are already asking for trouble if anything goes sideways, because you're automatically in the wrong because you're going against the standard. And it doesn't matter what evidence there is to back it up. It doesn't really matter what training you have, what skill set you have. If it's not what the system supports, it just opens you up to a lot more liability and legal action.
Even though your scope of practice may actually cover that particular care.
Yeah, exactly.
In regards to the hospital setting, is there quite a negative perspective from that angle towards midwives supporting in a home setting?
Yeah, I would say that there's pockets all over where, somebody really lucky, this hospital or this group practice, is more supportive. But by and large, in the south of the U.S., it is still very much a patriarchal man's, world, especially when it comes to medical. And what we find that does actually is sometimes the women are trying so hard to show that they are not playing favorites by supporting women. It can actually be more hostile sometimes with females in the hospital setting. And we,
as in like female doctors or midwives towards the women. Wow. Okay.
It's like, especially the OBs, I feel like the female OBs really are trying to enter a good old boys club. And it's, kind of their way of surviving. But what that does on the other end is women, and we see it a lot in the South, where midwives are recommending a transfer of care for one reason or another, and women are absolutely refusing to go in. They're afraid to go in. They're afraid of how they're going to be treated. They're afraid of CPS. They're afraid of medical kidnapping. They're afraid of just basic punishment for having planned a home birth at all. And it creates a lot more danger to the mothers and the babies because we don't have that option for seamless transfer of care. We can't just call in and say, we have this person. Even in the licensed states in the South, we just don't find in practice, for the most part, that we get that. It's still midwife is trying to give report. They're not really being listened to. I've been accompanied women as a doula that need to transfer from home to hospital. I've gone in with them, taken their chart records and handed it to staff and literally watched them throw it in the trash can. And I would get it out of the trash can and follow. And so when we do find the pockets where people are friendly and kind and respect women's choices, we tend to try and go there all the time, which again, sometimes means we're driving past 2 or 3 hospitals to get to a friendly, which again does not improve safety or outcomes.
And a potential emergency as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You said medical kidnapping before. Could you just explain what that means for the listeners?
Medical kidnapping is where a doctor, nurse, some other hospital staff decides that they care more and have better interest in mind for the baby than the parents do, and they will take legal action or even just do things where the baby's not able to be moved, IVs, putting on belly blankets, things like that where it restricts parent access. But there's a viral case right now, where a mother was forced into a C-section during labor because of medical kidnapping. They decided that they knew better what was safest for her baby. And so she was forced into a C-section, even though everybody was stable, for them to basically have control of that baby.
And you mentioned CPS as well. I know it's not as common over here in Australia, but I have heard stories over there where basically it's threatened that child safety would be called if you didn't follow the recommendations of care for the baby.
Yeah, and sometimes for things as simple as vitamin K injections. I know a mom just last year who they threatened it, so she conceded, and then they called anyway. So she ended up with the baby getting the vitamin K she didn't want, as well as a CPS case.
Yeah, it's very sad. All right, so next question I had, are you aware of any situations where midwives have been arrested or fined for supporting a woman with a breech baby?
Yes. We actually have 2 instances of that in the general vicinity in the south of the U.S. that I'm currently aware of right now, and both still in process of outcomes.
Yeah.
One, there was a poor outcome. For the other, to my knowledge, there was not a poor outcome. It just was a transfer situation, and they didn't like that they had been attempting a home birth. It blows my mind. Like, we decided that this was no longer a low risk, safe option. So here we are. And instead of being like, good for you, we're glad you came, this is what we would have wanted from the get go, there's punishment and hostility. I don't understand that. I feel like if you want people to come to you, even if it's fake, it should be trying to be super sweet and friendly and butter them up so they'll want to come back and do it again or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
Well, that's what's expected of healthcare professionals, but apparently there's many that get away with not behaving very kindly. And it astounds me the language that is used in many settings, towards women, and there's just no consciousness about what's being said or how it's being said. I think the only way to describe it, it's very unconscious, and they need to become aware of it. It should be mandatory training. To become a healthcare practitioner, it should be mandatory training that you know how to communicate effectively, clearly, and respectfully.
Well, for certified professional midwives that are taking the NARM pathway, cultural competency is required for every recertification cycle now to make sure that, not just with women, but with women of a variety of cultures, that you can be respectful and respect their cultural differences and religious needs and things of that nature. And no other time in our lives, is autonomy so stripped from us as when we are growing another life. And there's some type of mentality that if you are pregnant, you no longer have authority over your own decision-making capacities or over your own body. And I can't fathom a time in a man's life where people would get away with that.
Yeah. I will just share as well something that's happened here recently in Australia for women who might be listening who have been through an experience that wasn't consensual or they felt coerced. A woman recently in Australia has just been successful in suing the hospital that she was in after being coerced into having a vaginal examination when she had made it very clear in her birth preferences and antenatally that she wanted 0. And the midwife had withheld access to her MGP midwife and access to pain relief like the bath or shower or something like that. So it was a bribery, I guess. I have to do this first and then I can do those things for you. And so, of course, she then obliged and then took it to court and she won.
Good for her.
And give women some hope that there is changes happening, at least here in Australia anyway. But yeah, that's exactly what you said. Like there's no other time where our rights are stripped from us as women.
Could you imagine being told, like, I cannot prescribe you cough medicine until I stick my fingers inside of you?
Yeah.
No. But unfortunately, it requires action on the women's part. And so many are so traumatized by it, they don't want to relive it. Or they're so busy, now you've got a newborn and you're trying to heal and all that, it kind of slips through the cracks. And I have a friend right now that I am encouraging her, it's not taking it to court, but to write a letter and send it to every board member, every higher up in the hospital system where she was absolutely disregarded and nearly became septic because of it. She was already becoming septic. She was starting to run a fever and was starting to have blood lab issues and things of that nature. And she had to go 3 separate places before someone finally listened to her and got her appropriate treatment. That's wild to me.
I think, and the other thing is some women get told that you wouldn't have a case or someone couldn't be bothered. And so they don't bother because they're like, oh, well, it's already traumatic to go into it and then to get to the end and potentially not get anywhere. And I think some actually do have a case. With some of my guests that I've interviewed, there's definitely some stories that I've heard that I've gone, oh, that's not okay. It's really not okay. Yeah. Could you share more about the lack of choices given to mothers from both obstetricians and midwives?
Yeah, so what we are finding, particularly here in the South, for breech babies, it is C-section only. And they will give you the option for ECV, and then if that doesn't work, C-section. There are very, very few hospital choices for women with breech babies. And most of those, from what I have been told, my experience talking to, I probably talked to close to 100 breech carrying mothers a year. I love to give education and information. I like to go through all the, potential reasons for breech and potential outcomes and choices. I'm huge on choices. I always want people to feel like they are making the choice. They know it's not the only option. And the majority of those women do end up choosing a C-section if the baby doesn't turn because they're already 38, 39, 40 weeks when they're finding out the baby is breech. And it's just too much for them to, pivot and gather all the information and make a change. But what I found is they still feel like they had a choice and they decided that the C-section was what they ultimately felt most comfortable with, which is what gives me so much peace and pleasure is, yeah, that's not what I would choose, but they had the choice. And that's really what matters to me. So what we have found is, again, most of the hospitals and doctors in the area, midwives in the area who will do vaginal breech birth in the hospital typically will not do it if you're a VBAC, won't do it if you're a primip. Many will only do Franks. And then most of them will not come in for your breech delivery. Like if I'm on call and you have your baby, I will do it for you. But if I'm not on call and you come in, it's up to whoever is there. I've heard very few cases where they had built a relationship with the doctor to the point where they would come in when it was not their on-call day. The vast majority of the women don't even know that there are some options for vaginal breech birth, because I don't even think that the doctors in the system know who the people are who will do it. It takes a lot of time and effort and energy to kind of try and find these people and places where you can give those options. And then most of the states in the south of the U.S., not all, but most, do have breech restrictions on certified nurse midwives. And so a lot of the states, some it is explicitly, not allowed. Some it is kind of frowned upon. So it's not allowed, but you don't have a lot of backup or support.
So not illegal, not, I guess, accepted in the community.
Yeah, I think the term is, there was a memo that went out saying, we don't want you to do this. And so while it's not actually regulated, if anything at all.
Who's that memo coming from?
Whatever the licensing boards are for that particular state.
Yeah.
And so if something were to go sideways with that birth and it's already kind of frowned upon, it just doesn't, they're going to come harder at you. They're going to want to look at more charts. It just opens you up to a little bit more scrutiny. And midwifery has been vilified since the beginning of time, and it doesn't get any better. It doesn't seem like. There's some ebbs and flows. Sometimes it seems a little better, while still not great. And other times feel like everybody should be hiding in caves. And so doing something that expressly opens you up to scrutiny is not something most people are willing to do, because most of these women have families. They have children. They got to take care of them too. And it's hard to wholeheartedly serve women when in the back of your mind is, hope I don't get arrested tonight for supporting this woman. It's a terrible way to live.
Such a horrible thought to have as a midwife when you just want to be with women and supporting women. Why do you think breech is feared, either from women, midwives, obstetricians? Perspective that comes to mind.
I think particularly in the U.S., and I think I mentioned that I have Australian family, so I do know a little bit about how Australia works on that mentality too. But there's such a mentality that doctors and medical professionals are so much higher, more than everybody's vote's not equal. Their vote's worth at least, 10 of the layperson. And so I think once the term breech trial came out and said, vaginal breech birth, dangerous. I mean, we saw that if you watch the documentary, Heads Up, The Disappearing Art of Vaginal Breech Birth, the doctor who had done hundreds of breech births and stopped once the term breech trial came out, because now it's been said that it's not safe. And now it's, taboo in the hospital system, and policies have changed and all of that. And I think once a policy comes out that behooves the system, I'm not talking about the individuals working in the system, that benefits the system, it's so hard to change that. And if you're working in that system, again, nobody's going to be like, I'm going to buck the system. To heck with it all. Who cares if my family starves? I'm going to do what's right? Most people don't have that luxury to be able to do that. And so that mentality of I'll just go along with it. And then as people have gone along with it and the skills have been lost, there is a real fear, because you can't take a head down baby, emergency maneuvers and thought process and just flip it upside down. That's not how breech birth works. So now there is a whole skill set that's been lost, similar to forceps. So many doctors now only know how to do a vacuum. And if a doctor actually learns and knows how to do forceps, at least in our area, all the practices in that hospital will call that doctor, even if he's not one of theirs, because he's the sole person in the system that actually knows how to use that skill. And so I think that's a huge part, is now we are afraid of it because we don't know what to do if something goes wrong. And the system is not set up that makes it really easy for doctors and midwives to go and get those skills themselves. There's nobody sponsoring vaginal breech birth conferences, right? There's not a drug company behind it, a pharmaceutical company to host this conference. So most of their continuing education is put on by big pharma. And most of these doctors, don't have the time, the money, the wherewithal, probably even the knowledge of where to look to go and acquire those skills.
Or interest.
Yeah. And so it's always so exciting when we're doing any type of participating in a breech conference or something, and there's doctors there. It excites all of us. We're all thrilled to see these rogue doctors who are really out there to educate themselves and make a difference from the inside. I have mad respect for them. I know several of them, and it's a fight for them, just to be allowed to do what they are really skilled in doing, because it's not policy.
Yeah, and coming back to that system, when they implement that policy, over time it becomes a cultural norm. And there's no question about it, unconsciously doing it. And so that is such a hard thing to shift and change. And it does take, as much as we can, as midwives push it and women push it, we do need the obstetricians on board to actually support and work in collaboration with the women and the midwives as well. Again, to the women listening, the push is to the obstetricians even more so, like calling out, writing letters to them, telling them what you want, what sort of care you need and what. It's important. That's how we make a shift.
And the hospital boards too.
Yes.
Like the people who are the pencil pusher policymakers, saying, I will drive 3 hours to this other hospital I know, and that's business you're losing because you refuse to offer me a valid option. Money's the only thing they care about.
Yeah, that's business you're losing. I'd like to just point that out because they make money. Mm-hmm. So that is the driving factor. So yeah, you have to push it as a community and let them know that it is something you're looking for. All right. Next question. So this one's from a listener. Sometimes it feels like we are overreacting about the risks and that it's in regard to breech and that it's not that bad. What's the truth?
Every birth has its own set of potential risk factors. Every birth. And everyone is going to have a different set of potential risk factors for the individual, for the type of birth, that baby. There's not one set of risk factors that applies to everyone. What I will say about breech birth is what I just said a moment ago. You can't take what you know about vertex, head down, cephalic birth, and just flip it upside down and apply it and say, well, that's how you handle a breech birth. The mechanisms are a little bit different. How much time you have once the baby's rumping to get that baby out varies depending on the baby's condition and, again, the entire picture. So while breech is a fairly common variation, 2 to 3% of babies are said to be breech at term. I argue that number is probably a little higher.
I think we've got 3 to 4% over here.
Yeah.
I would argue it's even higher than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not counting all those that have ECVs either. This is just breech at birth. So there's more.
Right. And, just based on my tiny pool of numbers, I see quite a lot higher percentage. And so I think that, people have to respect that it is a fairly common variation, but that doesn't make it normal. Kind of like, and I'm not saying that a breech is an emergency, like a shoulder dystocia is an emergency, but shoulder dystocia is not normal. It doesn't mean it can't be handled and resolved. Asynclitic baby, not normal, doesn't mean it can't come out, right? So babies are meant to be born head down. That's how we are designed as a species, as mammals are. Look at mammals across, the globe. Head first is how the majority of them come. Plenty are born breech, and mammals all over the spectrum. So it definitely works, but you have to have someone who knows how to support a variation or an emergency or something that goes on with that breech baby, because you can very seriously injure a breech baby if you are pulling on them. They're, especially if they're born to the head, the neck is the most delicate area you've got, and you got a baby swinging from there. Like, you got to make sure you're not pulling on that baby or moving on aggressively, or how do you get a head out? Those types of things. So, I just think it's really important that we understand that breech absolutely can be a beautiful, safe, home, vaginal option, any of those, all of those, but it needs to be respected, and it needs to have the clarity to say, okay, this is the potential risk factors with a breech birth kind of across the board. And for you in particular, like, are you a primip? Are you a VBAC? Do you have other things going on that need to be taken into consideration? So I think it's not that it's not a big deal, but it's also not that it is a big deal. It's being aware and making choices based on real information and making sure that you are given actual good, solid, clear evidence and information so that you can make the right choice for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know the common saying around breech that gets thrown around is it's a variation of normal. I much prefer it's a variation of birth because you have a higher chance of needing hands-on with a breech versus a head down. So it's just a variation of birth, just like anything other.
Right, exactly.
Sorry. What is the time limit from rumping for? Like, as in, why? Why do they?
Yeah. So I don't like using a time limit for rumping to birth. I like using condition of the baby. I've had babies that right at the end, just before rumping, you're already kind of getting the niggly feeling, or, heart rate still normal, but trending down, or you had a decel, whatever the case may be. And those babies, once they're rumping, you kind of want them out. And if feet come out and baby doesn't have great tone, there's not a reason to wait. Doesn't matter if it's been 10 seconds or 6 minutes. If the baby starts showing you the baby is not doing well, that baby needs to get out. So looking at the baby, some people talk a lot about looking at the cord and things like that. But if blood's trapped in the cord and it's compressed higher up, the cord can look great. So it's really about looking at the baby and the baby's tone and letting that be the guiding factor as to when does this baby need to get out, how quickly. If the baby is vigorous and tummy crunching and tone is great, then let mom and baby keep going as long as there's continuous progress being made. But once a baby tells you it's not happy, then it's time to get that baby out. And that's when you use the skills that you spend a lot of time and money investing in.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So I've got 2 questions around VBACs. You mentioned already a lot of the women that you've talked with have gone and chosen a cesarean anyway. So come second baby, high chance they're going to want a VBAC. In your area, like that southeast area, can midwives support women for a VBAC at home, or is it only hospital?
It depends on the state. There are some state that absolutely is not allowed by regulation for midwives to attend. And then some of the southeastern states you can.
Is that law, or is it the regulators of the midwife?
It's actually in the licensing regulations. So if they do that, they do risk losing their licensure.
Yeah.
It's not a memo in those cases. It's actually part of their regulations.
Yeah. Okay. So from your experience, prolonged rupture of membranes more common in breech presentation?
Complete or incomplete breeches where you've got the little pokey parts that are lower down. Yes, I have personally seen that to be the case. Not so much with frank breech. With frank breech, it tends to be, a lot more like a vertex baby. But if you're dealing with a complete or incomplete, or you get that, rupture of membranes and labor is not immediately following, you can pretty much suspect, this baby's probably going to end up being complete or incomplete.
Yeah. And last question I had, so I've interviewed a few women who have a bicornuate uterus, or some even assumed based on how many breech babies they've managed to have.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience supporting women with a known bicornuate uterus? If so, what have you observed, and what should these women be aware of if they're choosing a vaginal?
Yes, I have actually gotten to work with in various ways women who have bicornuate uterus. So one of the biggest things is how much of a septum do they have? And most of the women don't know, but knowing kind of which side of the septum the baby's on can be helpful if you need to go and do something with the baby. You kind of know where you're aiming because it's not quite as central as with an average uterus. And then if the septum is quite large, quite long, there is an increased potential for preterm labor, IUGR, because that septum does seem to have an effect on the baby's growth. So a lot of it is just trying to get the pregnancy to term where it's safe to be out of the hospital with that baby's gestational age. I would say most of the ones that I have personally had experience with, have had a fairly small septum. They have absolutely carried to term. And other than the fact that you can almost always count on them to have a breech baby, it's been, pretty straightforward beyond that. But I have had 2 instances with moms who had very long septums that did end up creating some preterm birth challenges.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there any advice or words of wisdom that you'd like to share with the women listening who have a breech baby on board?
I would like to say that nothing just out of the gate, other than a baby with a genetic anomaly where the head is disproportionately larger than the baby, or, a condition where there's organs externally, or, disregarding those things, there's no situation where it automatically would disqualify you from being a candidate for a vaginal breech birth, whether that is being a first-time mom, whether that is being a VBAC, whether that is having a complete or incomplete breech. None of those things disqualifies you out of the gate for having a vaginal breech birth. And I would argue that first-time moms and VBACs have a higher need for a vaginal breech birth, because if you're a first-time mom, you're already stigmatized if you're a VBAC. You're already limiting your options if you're a VBAC. So doing everything possible to avoid that is huge in my opinion. And then, if you're a VBAC, there's quite a large number of hospitals in our area, in the Southeast, that support VBAC after one C-section. There is only 2 practices, I think, that I'm aware of that will for sure support a VBAC after 2 C-sections. And I don't know of any in the system that will support a VBAC after 3. So, really trying to not have a C-section for something that's not clearly an indication for a C-section. Like, yeah, maybe your baby is one of the babies that does need to be born via C-section. Those babies exist. Absolutely. C-section is not the enemy for all things every time, but walking in for an elective C-section for something that has been done for thousands of years safely, but we've lost the skills and we've lost the drive to learn the skills is just tragic to me. Like, the number of VBACs that I talked to who had a C-section because their baby was breech is astronomical. I would say, next to failed induction, C-section for breech is probably the most common thing that I hear as a reason for a C-section. And that's just tragic to me when, again, it is a skill that people have and that people can learn. And it's absolutely one of the most gratifying things in the world when you see a mom who was told she couldn't do something succeed. I mean, there's just, nothing like it when a mom's been told you have no options but this, and you can't do this. This isn't possible because you're a this. And then they educate themselves and they make a plan and then they succeed. And it's just amazing. It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean, over here in Australia, it's mandatory that we practice breech skills every year, yet it's not commonly done. And then what a lot of women don't realize is when you have a breech cesarean, the maneuvers that we practice for like a vaginal birth, it's on her back. And then if she's having cesarean, those same maneuvers are used for the breech in the cesarean. Mm-hmm. It's just they have that fail-safe of being able to make the cut a bit bigger if they're needing to make a bit more space. But they're actually having to do the exact same maneuvers. So therefore, they know how to do the maneuvers with mum on her back. Nowadays, we're trying to push more upright because we know we have better outcomes. We know there's more space. So now it's flipping the brain for those that are so used to doing it with a woman on her back, flipping it around and looking at it a different way and learning how to.
Vice versa. When we're teaching upright, we ourselves have to make sure that we're also teaching supine, because some moms, especially first-time moms, sometimes just need to recline for a while, vertex or breech. And so we do ourselves a disservice when we limit ourselves, in my opinion. But yeah, I've said that. I'm like, why can't they just use the hole God made? They're doing the same maneuvers.
Oh, I like that. Awesome. Oh, it's been really lovely chatting with you. It's been good, deep, important questions that need to be touched on, and just so women have a really good understanding of what it's like from the other side as well. We want to be with women, but we are also restricted as well, and we do have to protect ourselves. And so thank you for your time and wisdom.
May I add 2 other things?
Absolutely. Go.
I know women who are traveling upwards of 3 hours to get to people who will support them in having a vaginal breech birth. And most of them are traveling in labor. So again, because you can't plan birth, right? So most people don't have the luxury of just like, oh, I'll just travel to where there's someone who will support me for the last 2-3 weeks of my pregnancy. And so that added stress, I hypothesize that part of the reasons that we do end up needing to do a maneuver, even if it's just a chest press or shoulder press, is because of the added stress to these breech mamas. When moms were already planning an out-of-hospital birth with a midwife, and then the baby is breech, and it's like, no big deal, my midwife does that. I feel like those midwives are like, yeah, these babies just fall out. And then when you've got the midwives who are taking the 40-week breech mama that they've only met virtually and trying to get this history on them, and the mom's driving 2-3 hours and, trying to find someone who will let them stay there. That stress, we know that impacts baby position, maternal tissues, all those things. And so we're already increasing the difficulty level by putting these poor mamas in this situation, by creating this massive level of stress on them and their babies right at the end of the pregnancy, when it's the very time they're supposed to be getting all ooey and gooey and relaxed and rested. And now they're put in these really ridiculous positions. And so I want to say shame on the system that they are dying on the hill that this is safer for moms and babies, when it's clear moms and babies want choices and options and bodily autonomy. And the other thing that I'm so passionate about, and so I'm not going to miss an opportunity to get on my little soapbox about it, is when midwives and doctors, whoever's supporting these moms, because again, I know some great doctors who are supporting vaginal breech birth, but there is a tendency for us to go so far the other side of what the system does. So where the system is, everything is fear-based and everything is a tragedy waiting to happen. We want to be like, birth is normal and birth works and things just go the way they're meant to go. And yes, I do believe we were created for birth to work, but birth does not always work the way it was designed to work, any more than our bodies always work the way we were designed to work, right? We were never meant to have sickness or illness or cancer, right? And so I think sometimes we do a disservice because we so are like, yeah, it's just a vaginal breech birth, no big deal. It's, a variation of normal. And then we do need to do maneuvers, or it is a harder birth, or the baby does need a little help to get going. And we create as much trauma for these families by not having really educated them going in. And I have definitely been accused of over informing people, and like, they probably would have had a home birth, but after you told them all those terrible, scary things that could possibly happen, they chose to go to the hospital. But those terrible, scary things could happen. And I am very clear that they probably won't. They don't usually. But you need to know that I may need to stick my arm up inside of you, or that it takes breech babies an extra minute on average to kind of come around to their head down counterpart, if you're talking APGAR scores. And if you don't tell a family that, and then you traumatize them because you were so excited about the possibility of getting to a vaginal breech birth at home, that's the same thing the system does. It's just on the other end of it. And I just really want to encourage people who are attending vaginal breech birth, you don't have to say things in a scary way. You can just give information and facts and still say, and I really hope you choose to do it at home because it's awesome and I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do, while still leaving that choice up to the families and not forcing them into what your desire for them is, or what your choice would be if you were in their shoes. And so I just really want to encourage people to really give good counseling so that families really are making a choice, not being pigeonholed into something, regardless of what way that is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it is informed decision making. You can't make an informed decision without the risks and benefits. And that's part of that. It's no different to a head down baby. Here's what a shoulder dystocia looks like. If we have to maneuver and get baby's posterior arm out, here's what a postpartum hemorrhage might look like. This is how I would manage it in the home setting or the hospital setting. For you to be informed of the risks, you have to know what they are and how that would look, because that then helps that comprehension if it actually is happening. Oh, I remember my midwife talking about this. So then it doesn't become traumatic because it's a memory of, okay, I understand what this means.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. I love talking about breech birth. I love talking about birth, but I have a particular love for talking about twins and breeches. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you again. The Breech Birth podcast is independently created and produced. If you'd like to support the continuation of this space, you can do so through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support helps keep these stories being shared and accessible to women and families around the world, and you can find the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening to the Breech Birth podcast. These stories matter. They stretch what we think we know and bring voice to experiences that need to be heard. I'm so grateful to our guests who have shared their experiences with us, raw, real, and full of wisdom. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe and share with others. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Breech Birth Podcast. And if you have a breech story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, may we continue to reclaim the narrative, one story at a time.